Hey everybody, today we are going to be going over basic horse coat colors. Now, we are only going to skim the surface because that is a rabbit hole that we do not have time to go down today. But with that being said, what colors do we already know? Horses come in all shapes and sizes, all colors. With that being said, whenever you drive down the road in your Western Kentucky home and you're looking out in a pasture and you see a bunch of horses out there, you may look at them and say that they look like a white horse, or they look yellow, or they look black. Is that all that there is though? That's typically what people will say, but we know that it's way more than that. Now, horses come in three main base colors. Now that's not saying that there's only three colors of horses, but those horses will either derive from a black horse, a bay horse, or a sorrel or chestnut horse. Now, a black horse is going to be what it sounds like. It's going to have a solid black coat all over its body. A sorrel or a chestnut horse is going to have a red or a cherry color coat. And then a bay horse is going to have that red or cherry colored coat with black markings. So this is an example of a bay. It's going to have a black mane, a black tail, and black legs. And then if you want to get really technical, it also will have black points. So on its ear, its muzzle, that will also be black. And that's how you can identify it as a bay. So here are some examples. So this horse right here is going to be a chestnut. It has that red cherry look to it, and it's solid red or solid cherry, however you want to describe it. This horse in the middle, this is a black horse, solid black, and then this is a bay horse. This horse right here is the same color as this one. There's just different shades and different varieties of that color, but they're all the same. Now, those three are not the only horse colors that we've seen. If you've ever witnessed a pasture of horses, you probably know that to be true. There's way more than what we're going to cover today. So it could be a brown horse, a gray horse, a buckskin, maybe it's a paint, maybe it's a roan, or maybe it's a palomino. Now, that's great and all. How do we figure this out? Like, whoa, why do we have way more than three options if they all come from three options? That doesn't make sense. Well, let's talk about it a little bit. Now, this all boils down to genetics. So, we are going to look at a Punnett square. Now, Punnett squares are going to be a very basic way for us to figure out what a horse color is actually going to be, or how they got the color that they have. So up here we have a sorrel horse, and over here we have a black horse. Now, with a Punnett square, which you can look at the paper that I've handed you, this horse up here is going to have two lowercase letters. This horse over here is going to have an uppercase and a lowercase. Now, this all goes back to recessive and dominant genes. So on this worksheet that I gave you, you can see that there's some definitions that we'll work through to kind of get a baseline understanding of that. But what this means is the uppercase letter is going to be a dominant gene. The lowercase letter is a recessive gene. So this horse up here, we know that it had to have all recessive genes for it to get that color. This horse over here, somewhere in its pedigree, it had a dominant gene, which is why that dominant color showed through. So to fill this out, what you do is you take this letter, and it goes in this box. And then you'll take this letter, and it'll go in this box. And then same thing for the other two boxes. So you'll take this letter next to it, and this letter, and it'll go there. And then you'll take this letter, and it'll go there. Now, that's great. We filled it out. What does that actually mean? So if you're looking at this, what this means is that if these two horses have a baby, there is a 50% chance that it is going to be a black horse, or a 50% chance that it's going to be sorrel. Does that make sense? Now that's very, very basic, and this doesn't cover all colors, but this kind of gives you an idea of how a horse might be the way it is. Now, whenever we're thinking about genetics, there are so many different varieties of colors, of Punnett squares that you could have. I showed you a very basic one just so we can understand, but an easier way to think of it is a horse's coat color is essentially like our hair color. So I have brown hair, so that gene was the one that essentially won in the Punnett square. Now blonde hair, red hair, all of that all comes back to genes. Now, I know I've said it a billion times, but there's several different options. So just because they come from a red, black, or bay coat color, that doesn't mean that that's all that you can have. So with that being said, we're going to briefly go over some options that you might see when you're looking at coat color. So we have a Palomino and a paint horse here. Now a Palomino is going to have that yellowish golden skin tone, and then it's going to have white mane and tail. Now, there's different varieties, so you may find them more golden looking like this horse, or you may find them more white looking. They are a Palomino. And then we have our paint horses. So you'll either see them in a white and black or a white and brown, like this horse. Now, again, so many different varieties of paint, but I wanted to put that in there because that is a very common horse that you'll see. We also have buckskins, duns, and cremellos. So your cremello horse here, this is going to look similar to a Palomino, but it's going to almost have like a pearly coat to them. Our duns are going to have a reddish coat to them, and then they're going to have a stripe down their back, which is known as a dorsal stripe. And then our buckskins. These are similar to bay, but instead of that red base, they're going to have kind of a goldeny yellow base, but they're also going to have a black mane and a black tail, and they're going to have black legs, and that is a buckskin. And then we have our roans. So we have blue roans, red roans, and bay roans. In this picture, I just have a red roan and a blue roan, but bay roan is also an option. So essentially, this is that coat color, a chestnut coat and a black coat with white hairs intermixed throughout. A bay roan would be the same thing, the bay coat with white hairs. Very pretty horses, not super common whenever you're considering all the options, but they're very gorgeous. And then we have a Garullo. You may also hear it called a Garula. Both are right. So this is going to be kind of a grayish smoky color with black markings. And then we have gray horses. So this is really where genetics come into play. So whenever these horses are born, they're actually born black. And you think you might have one, but more often than not, they'll shed out and grow up to be a gray color. And then we have an Appaloosa. Now an Appaloosa is actually a breed, not a color, but people will see this and wonder how they get that. So that is going to be that animal. So how do you go about identifying where the horse's coat color came from? So the first thing you need to do, identify what it is. So is it a black coat? Is it a sorrel coat? Or is it a bay coat? And then you can kind of work backwards to figure out what their Punnett square might have looked like to kind of figure out how they got the colors that they did. Now, ultimately, to really know what their Punnett square looked like, you need to know what their sire and dams is. So that's going to be their mom and dad. And to do that, you'll need to know their papers or know the person that bred them. So that is going to be a very basic overview of how you can figure out what a horse's coat color is going to be. But ultimately, it comes down to genetics.